I, 26F, have been best friends with Megan, 27F, for as long as I can remember. We met in elementary school, bonded over our shared love of adventure books, and from that day on, we were inseparable. She was more than a friend. She was like family. We'd been through so much together. Awkward teenage phases, breakups, first jobs, and everything in between. When Megan met Ryan, 29M, about 4 years ago, I was thrilled for her. After all, she'd had some pretty awful relationships in the past. One ex, in particular, had left her shattered after a nasty betrayal. So when Ryan came into the picture, it felt like she had finally met someone who would treat her right. At least, that's what I thought at first. I remember the first time Megan introduced me to Ryan. We met at this trendy little cafe she loved, and I could see immediately why she was so smitten. He was tall, good-looking, and had this easy confidence that made everyone around him feel comfortable. Megan was practically glowing when she sat next to him, her arm casually linked with his. I'd never seen her so happy. That day, we spent hours talking, laughing, and getting to know each other. Ryan seemed perfect, almost too perfect. But I brushed it off, thinking I was just being overly protective of Megan. After all, she was like a sister to me, and after everything she'd been through, I wanted to make sure she wasn't hurt again. As their relationship progressed, Megan and Ryan became the picture-perfect couple. They traveled together, attended fancy events, and even moved in with each other after 2 years. Megan would call me regularly to gush about Ryan, how sweet he was, how he surprised her with romantic dinners, how he supported her dreams. I was genuinely happy for her, but there was always this nagging feeling in the back of my mind. Something about Ryan felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was the way his eyes lingered on me a little too long during our group outings, or how he always seemed to find an excuse to stand a little too close. At first, I thought I was imagining things. I told myself that Ryan was just being friendly, and besides, Megan was deeply in love with him. There was no way he'd ever jeopardize that. But as time went on, I started noticing more. There were moments when Ryan's charm felt calculated, like he knew exactly how to make people like him. He was attentive and polite, but there was something beneath the surface, something I couldn't quite place. One night, about a year into their relationship, Megan and Ryan invited me over for dinner at their apartment. It was supposed to be a casual evening, good food, wine, and catching up. Megan had just gotten a promotion at work, and we were celebrating. At one point, Megan stepped out to take a phone call from her boss, leaving me and Ryan alone at the table. It was the first time I had been alone with him for more than a few minutes, and the atmosphere suddenly felt different. So Ryan said, leaning back in his chair, his eyes fixed on me. "You and Megan have been friends for a long time, huh?" "Yeah, pretty much forever," I replied, trying to keep the conversation light. "She's like a sister to me." He smiled, but there was something unsettling about the way he looked at me. "She's lucky to have you. You're pretty amazing, you know that?" I laughed nervously, unsure of how to respond. "Thanks, but I'm nothing special." Ryan's smile widened. "I don't know about that." Before I could say anything else, Megan came back into the room, oblivious to the tension. The rest of the night went on as usual, but I couldn't shake the strange feeling Ryan had given me. I told myself I was overreacting, that it was all in my head. After all, Ryan had never done anything explicitly inappropriate. But still, I started to feel more uneasy around him. Over the next few years, Ryan's behavior toward me became increasingly confusing. There were moments when he seemed completely disinterested in me, focused entirely on Megan, like a good boyfriend should be. But then there were other moments, fleeting glances, comments that felt just a little too personal, that made me question everything. By the time Megan and Ryan got engaged, I had almost convinced myself that I was being paranoid. Megan was ecstatic when Ryan proposed, and I had never seen her so happy. Of course, I said yes when she asked me to be her maid of honor. How could I not? She was my best friend, and I wanted her wedding to be perfect. The months leading up to the wedding were chaotic but exciting. Megan was caught up in the whirlwind of planning, and I did everything I could to support her. Ryan, for the most part, stayed out of the wedding details, which wasn't unusual. He'd always seemed a little aloof when it came to that kind of stuff, but I figured he was just the let Megan take the lead type of guy. Then came the wedding day. The venue was stunning, an old mansion surrounded by lush gardens. Megan looked breathtaking in her dress, and everything seemed to be going perfectly. As the bridal party gathered outside for photos before the ceremony, I noticed Ryan standing off to the side, looking unusually tense. I chalked it up to pre-wedding jitters and didn't think much of it. But then, just as I was about to rejoin the group, Ryan approached me. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low and serious. I blinked, surprised. Sure. What's up?" He motioned for me to follow him around the corner, away from the rest of the bridal party. My stomach knotted with a sense of unease. When we were out of sight, Ryan turned to face me, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I can't do this," he blurted out. My heart sank. "Can't do what?" He ran a hand through his hair, looking agitated. "I can't marry her. I can't go through with this." I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. "What are you talking about? The wedding is about to start." "I know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't. I'm in love with you. I'm in love with you." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stared at him, searching his face for any sign that he was joking, that this was some sort of cruel prank. But the look in his eyes, desperate, pleading, told me he was dead serious. "No," I finally managed to whisper. "No, you can't do this. Megan, she loves you. You love her." The words tumbled out, but they felt hollow. The truth was, I had always sensed there was something off about Ryan's affection for Megan, but never in a million years did I imagine it would come to this. Ryan stepped closer, his voice low and urgent. "I thought I could go through with it, but I can't. I've been lying to myself, lying to Megan. You're the one I've always had feelings for, ever since the first time we met." My heart pounded in my chest, and a cold chill spread down my spine. I wanted to scream at him, tell him how disgusting this was, how he was about to destroy the woman he claimed to love. But all I could think about was Megan, standing there in her wedding dress, ready to marry this man who was now confessing his love to her best friend. "You can't do this," I said again, more forcefully this time. "This isn't fair to Megan. You're supposed to marry her today, Ryan. This is her wedding day." "I know," he said, and for a split second, I thought I saw regret flicker across his face. "But I couldn't walk down that aisle without telling you how I feel. I thought maybe you felt the same way." I took a step back, horrified. "What? No. Absolutely not. I love Megan like a sister, and you're supposed to be with her. How could you even think this is okay?" Ryan's face twisted, and for the first time, I saw the cracks in his perfect, charming exterior. His jaw clenched as he reached out to grab my hand, but I pulled away. "You don't understand," he said, his voice growing more desperate. "I've tried to make it work with Megan. I really have. But every time I'm with her, all I can think about is you. I can't pretend anymore." I felt sick, my head spinning with the weight of his confession. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. Megan was just a few steps away, oblivious to the bombshell that was about to detonate in her life. "You need to stop," I said, my voice trembling. "You need to forget this, Ryan. Marry Megan or call off the wedding, but don't drag me into this mess." He stared at me, his eyes searching mine for any glimmer of hope, but I gave him none. There was nothing but disgust and disbelief in my expression. After a few moments, Ryan sighed, running a hand over his face in frustration. "I knew you'd say that," he muttered, more to himself than to me. I couldn't keep it inside any longer. Without another word, I turned and walked away, my legs shaking as I made my way back to the bridal suite. My mind was racing. What was I going to do? How could I look Megan in the eye and pretend everything was fine? When I reached the suite, Megan was sitting in front of the mirror, adjusting her veil. She turned to me, beaming. "How do I look?" she asked, her voice full of excitement and nerves. I stared at her, my heart breaking. She looked beautiful, radiant even, but all I could think about was the truth I was about to drop on her. "Megan," I started, my voice cracking. Her smile faltered, and she immediately sensed that something was wrong. "What's going on? Did something happen?" I swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that were threatening to spill. Ryan, he told me something. Something I think you need to know. Megan's eyes widened in concern. What do you mean? What did he say? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. He told me that he's in love with me. For a moment, Megan just stared at me, her face frozen in shock. Then, slowly, her expression crumbled. What? No, that can't be right. I'm so sorry, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. I didn't know. I swear I didn't. He told me just now, right before the ceremony. Megan shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. Why would he say that? I don't know, I said honestly, but I couldn't let you marry him without knowing the truth. She stood up abruptly, her hands shaking as she gripped the back of the chair. I need to talk to him. I need to hear it from him. I nodded, feeling helpless as she stormed out of the room. My heart ached for her. Megan didn't deserve this, not on what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. I waited in the bridal suite for what felt like an eternity. The sound of distant voices drifted through the door, but I couldn't make out what was being said. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Guilt, anger, sadness. How had it come to this? After what seemed like hours, the door opened, and Megan walked back in. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. She looked broken. It's over, she said quietly, sinking into the chair in front of the mirror. I called off the wedding. I sat down beside her, my heart heavy. Megan, I'm so sorry. She held up a hand, silencing me. Don't. It's not your fault. It's his. I can't believe this is happening. Neither of us said anything for a long time. The silence was heavy, oppressive. Megan stared at her reflection in the mirror, her wedding dress now feeling like a cruel joke. I thought he loved me, she whispered after a while. I thought we were going to spend the rest of our lives together. I didn't know what to say. No words could fix what had just been shattered. The hours after Megan called off the wedding felt like a blur. The venue, once alive with excitement, now felt like a tomb, heavy with disappointment and grief. Guests, unsure of what had happened, began whispering amongst themselves, and one by one, they trickled out, leaving behind a celebration that never was. I stayed by Megan's side the entire time, not daring to leave her alone. She wasn't crying anymore. She had moved past that initial wave of shock. Now, she just looked numb, staring blankly at the remnants of her dream wedding, trying to process the betrayal. Ryan was nowhere to be seen. After their confrontation, he had left without saying a word to anyone, leaving Megan to pick up the pieces. As we sat there in silence, I felt a profound sense of guilt. Had I done the right thing? Telling her the truth had destroyed everything. Her relationship, her wedding, and possibly our friendship. But deep down, I knew I couldn't have kept it from her. Ryan had put me in an impossible position, and I couldn't let Megan marry a man who had confessed his love to someone else, even if that someone was me. That night, we left the venue together. Megan was staying at her parents' house for the time being, so I offered to drive her home. The car ride was painfully quiet. Every now and then, I would glance over at her, but she remained distant, lost in her thoughts. I wanted to comfort her, to say something that would make it all better, but what could I possibly say? Nothing would change the fact that her fiancé had betrayed her just hours before they were supposed to get married. When we finally pulled up to her parents' house, Megan turned to me and gave a small, sad smile. "Thank you," she said softly, "for telling me the truth." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I'm so sorry, Megan. I wish it didn't have to be this way." She sighed and looked down at her hands. "Yeah, me too." After she went inside, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, trying to process everything that had happened. I kept replaying the moment Ryan had confessed his feelings to me, wondering if I could have handled it differently, if there was something I could have said that would have stopped this disaster from unfolding. But no matter how many times I went over it, I knew there was no winning scenario. The moment Ryan opened his mouth, it was over. The days following the wedding were brutal, for both Megan and me. She understandably needed space, so we didn't talk much. I tried to check in on her a few times, sending her texts to let her know I was there if she needed anything, but most of the time she didn't respond. I could tell she wasn't angry at me, but the distance between us was growing, and I wasn't sure if we could ever go back to how things were before. Megan's family rallied around her, offering support in every way they could. Her parents, devastated by what had happened, encouraged her to take some time off work and focus on healing. They were furious with Ryan and had already started the process of demanding back all the money they'd spent on the wedding. But despite their efforts to protect her, I knew Megan was dealing with a deeper kind of pain, the kind that came from losing not just a relationship, but a future she had spent years imagining. As for Ryan, he completely disappeared. I heard through mutual friends that he had left town, presumably to avoid the storm of judgment and anger that would inevitably come his way. I hadn't spoken to him since the wedding, and I had no intention of doing so. The thought of him made me sick, and I couldn't fathom how he had the audacity to pull what he did. But despite my anger at Ryan, I couldn't shake the guilt I felt. Megan had lost everything, and while I knew that it wasn't my fault, part of me wondered if I had been the catalyst for her pain. Maybe if I had never been friends with Megan, Ryan wouldn't have developed feelings for me. Maybe this wouldn't have happened. Weeks passed, and things between Megan and me grew more strained. She wasn't openly hostile or anything, but there was a coldness in our interactions that hadn't been there before. When we did talk, it felt forced, like we were tiptoeing around each other. I knew that she was still processing everything, and I tried to give her the space she needed. But I missed her, my best friend, my confidant. And every time we talked, it felt like we were moving further and further apart. The distance only widened when Megan made a decision that shocked me. She reached out to Ryan. She called me one night out of the blue and told me she had been in contact with him. I just needed answers, she explained, her voice tight with emotion. I needed to understand why he did what he did. I couldn't believe it. Megan, he hurt you. He humiliated you. What more is there to understand? I know, she replied, her voice trembling. But I need closure. I can't just sit here and pretend like it didn't happen. I need to know what he was thinking. I didn't understand her decision at the time, and part of me felt betrayed. How could she even think of speaking to him after everything he had done? But Megan had always been the type of person who needed answers, even when they came from the most painful sources. After that, things between us became even more awkward. Megan and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was only surface-level conversations, nothing like the deep, meaningful talks we used to have. It felt like I was losing her, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Months went by, and eventually, Megan and I drifted apart. It wasn't a sudden break or a dramatic fallout. It was more like a slow fade. She started hanging out with different people, throwing herself into work and socializing to distract herself from the heartbreak. And I just watched from a distance, feeling helpless. But then, one day, out of nowhere, Megan showed up at my apartment. It had been weeks since we last spoke, and I was both surprised and relieved to see her. "I've been thinking," she said, standing in the doorway with a determined expression on her face, "about everything that happened. About you and Ryan and the wedding." I nodded, unsure of where this conversation was going. "Yeah," she sighed, looking down at her hands. "I've been so angry. Angry at him, angry at you. Even though I know you didn't do anything wrong. I guess I just didn't know how to handle all of it." "I get it," I said softly. "I've been feeling the same way." Megan looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "I've decided I'm not going to let what Ryan did ruin our friendship. You were right to tell me the truth. If you hadn't, I would have married someone who didn't really love me." My chest tightened with emotion, and I stepped forward, pulling her into a hug. "I never wanted to hurt you, Megan. I just couldn't let you go through with it without knowing." She hugged me back, and for the first time in months, it felt like things were finally going to be okay. After that conversation, Megan and I slowly began to rebuild our friendship. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of awkwardness, still unspoken tension between us. But we were both committed to healing, both for ourselves and for each other. Megan eventually went to therapy to work through the emotional trauma of the wedding and her relationship with Ryan. It helped her gain clarity and closure, and in time, she became stronger. She started dating again, cautiously at first, but with a newfound sense of self-worth and confidence. As for me, I learned a valuable lesson about boundaries and the importance of speaking the truth, even when it's painful. Ryan's confession had turned my life upside down, but in the end, I knew I had done the right thing. Megan deserved to know the truth, and even though it nearly cost us our friendship, it was better than living a lie. Our friendship, though different now, is stronger because of it. We're no longer the same people we were before the wedding, but we've grown, both as individuals and as friends. And while the scars of that day will always remain, we've learned how to move forward.
Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss new content. Share your thoughts and ideas in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think and what you'd like to see next. And if you want to keep watching more videos like this one, just click on the next video. See you there.